Hello, and welcome to Crawford Technologies webinar, Document Security, Things You Can Do to Keep Your Data Safe. My name is Katrina Fox, and I'm the Marketing Specialist for Crawford Technologies. Before I introduce the team, I want to take care of some housekeeping. You are all muted, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the question or chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel. I will be monitoring those questions, and the team will answer them at the end of our presentation. Also, this webinar will be recorded and sent out so you can rewatch it or send it on to colleagues. So without further ado, let me introduce our presenters. We have Ernie Crawford, MEDP, is the president and founder of Crawford Technologies. He has more than 30 years of senior marketing and management experience in the high-volume electronic printing market. For the past 20 years, Ernie has grown Crawford Technologies from a basement startup into a leading international technology company. And Scott Baker, he brings over 30 years of executive experience in marketing, strategy, international business development, global sales, and strategic alliances in the enterprise, output management, ECM, and BI software markets. And he is recognized as a global subject matter expert on customer communications management. So let me pass it on to Scott and the team.
Thanks, Katrina, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. It should be pretty quickly paced, as we've got a number of things to cover in our agenda. First, we'd like to level set and describe some of the things that are going on in the world relative to security and threats to security, and dive in a little bit to discuss some of those threats that are out there, particularly in the types of hackers that are trying to breach our security measures. We'll talk a little bit about regulations that everyone should be aware of and certainly being adherent to. And then we'll talk about some best practices and tips and tricks specifically around the areas of document workflows and securing those. Lastly, we'll finish up with a little bit of description relative to some of the security solutions that we actually bring to the table as Crawford Technologies. If you read newsletters, magazines, the newspaper, and you listen to the radio or watch television, you can't get away from all of the security breaches that are affecting every single one of us every single day in some facet. There was a great article recently about 11 dangerous breaches that should scare the heck out of all of us, some of which I've listed here as highlights. Everyone's aware of the Equifax breach that lasted for 3 months in 2017 that potentially impacted 143 million U.S. consumers. The estimated cost to Equifax to remediate that breach is approximately $275 million. Who can forget all of the scandal around the Facebook leak, if you want to call it that, to Cambridge Analytica, and that potentially released the data of 87 million Facebook users. Just recently, in the past month, Exactus, the company that no one knows about, who is down in Florida, revealed that they actually exposed on a publicly accessible server approximately 340 million individual records for almost every adult U.S. citizen. That's still ongoing. Back in 2015, in probably the first example of state-sponsored cyber warfare, North Korea allegedly funneled $81 million out of a bank in Bangladesh via the SWIFT money transfer system by spoofing the system. Fun facts to know and tell, nuclear power plants are not immune to potential hacks, as one in Germany was actually infected with malware. Their servers were infected with malware that could have given outside access to nefarious forces to the system used for moving highly radioactive nuclear fuel rods. Luckily, those servers were not connected to the web, or we would be having a different discussion. And of course, Chinese hackers in 2015 released personal information on 21.5 million employees, contractors, etc., of the Office of Personnel Management. This is both former employees and contractors as well as current employees and contractors. And it included their social security numbers and fingerprints. Every single day, there are new database attacks, new infrastructure attacks, new and innovative ways to steal information that is many times containing personally identifiable stuff as well as personal health care information. Interestingly enough, fines for breaches are not the only financial risk. A study done in 2017 said the average cost per data breach was approximately $3.62 million per incident. And we've broken that down into component costs, which are scary enough as it is. IBM just this past week or so published another study in concert with the Ponemon Institute, and they've estimated that the cost per breach has increased to $3.86 million. However, that's just a normal breach. If you consider some of the mega breaches like the Exactus breach and the Equifax breach, the costs to remediate those can be any place from $40 million to $350 million US. Nobody wants to be the next Equifax, Facebook, or Anthem. However, statistics say otherwise. Some of these are great quotes. Warren Buffett says that cybersecurity is the #1 problem with mankind. It's estimated that 93% of large organizations experienced at least one breach in the past year. 50% of companies say that a third party caused the breach. 9 in 10 companies will be hacked into this year. It's pretty amazing the amount of activity and the amount of focus and the amount of money that we spend trying to eliminate the possibility of breaches. But the statistics are certainly saying that our efforts need to step up.
So the question you have to ask yourself is, do you feel lucky? Are you the 1 in 10 that will not get hacked this year, or are you one of the 9 in 10 that will get hacked? Who is doing all this hacking? Well, a fellow by the name of Stuart Colson recently wrote a blog where he broke it down into the different types of hackers that are out there. It starts with script kiddies, basically bored teenagers. And I think it goes below that. My 6-year-old daughter the other day was trying to hack my Netflix account. They start young these days, and they're just learning, and it's something fun to do. And they then get together into groups and become hacking groups. A number of script kiddies working together. Then you get to the hacktivists, which are collections that are collectives that act with some kind of political or social motivation, trying to make the world a better place or make their point. And those can be some of the most highly publicized hacks. Black hat professionals, those are the experts that are using their determination and coding skills to try and either destroy something or seek some publicity, or even try and get some money. And then you get into the organized criminal gangs that are led by professional criminals, and those are serious hackers that are working within some kind of a sophisticated structure and guided by some strict rules to ensure what they do, their crimes don't go detected, that they're able to go under the radar of law enforcement. Then the nation states that are using massive computing power that they have and all of the experts that they can muster to be able to affect hacks of military, utilities, political, financial sectors, all for betterment of their position in the world. And then automated tools, which of course is fundamentally a piece of software that can act like a worm or virus and affect as much as possible in terms of damage and that the networks of bots turning all sorts of normal computers into part of a network of hacking. So that's what you're facing when you say, what are we going to do about it? We look at several different areas. And today we're going to focus on how do you mitigate that security risk, and if you how to keep from getting hacked, of course. And then, of course, if you do get hacked, how can you limit that damage so that you're not exposing information that shouldn't be exposed? So some of the definitions you need to know, because we will use them through this webinar. PII is personally identifiable information, something that can identify a person from that information. Personal health information has anything to do with the person's health records. And GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, which is an EU regulation that went into effect on the 25th of May this year. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's a U.S. set of regulations that basically ensures the protection of the personal health information of people in the United States. Certifications that we are mentioning, and these are the certifications that most of the organizations that work with any of these types of data should have, and certainly we have in our data centers. There's the SAE 16, also called SAS 70, which builds on into SOC 1 and SOC 2. Then there's the HITRUST CSF. Again, that one's focused on the healthcare industry and is really pretty much mandated by all of the large health providers to be able to meet HIPAA regulations. And PCI DSS is a certification that protects credit card information for the banking and credit industries.
I'd like to spend just a little bit of time, Ernie, on general data protection regulation, since it's certainly caused a lot of angst amongst companies all over the world and organizations all over the world. It's designed to protect the data rights of citizens of the European Union. The regulation itself has 99 articles in it that specify all aspects of how data is collected, how that data is used and distributed, and and it has some interesting transparency type of regulations in terms of disclosure to the actual citizens themselves. What type of being collected, and gives the citizens the right to be forgotten and to the right to actually have their data that's been collected on them by a particular organization packaged up and handed to them so they can take it with them to another vendor or something like that. What scared the ever-living bejesus out of most of the companies that feel like they're going to be affected by GDPR is the fact that for non-compliance, the fines are extraordinarily high. In fact, the fines specifically are 4% of your annual turnover, or 20 million euros, which is about $25,000 US, whichever is greater. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how litigation plays out. Some lawsuits have been filed in Europe already against Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, and some of those are for damages in excess of $4.2 billion US. Interestingly enough, the law also affects the entire data collection ecosystem, if you will. So not only is compliance required of you, an organization, but all of your vendors and partners that may have access to the data that you've collected on individual EU citizens, all those people have to be compliant with the GDPR regulations as well. There are lots and lots of aspects to this, but primarily it's based on the assumption of privacy and of your own data as a citizen of the EU, and mandates that all systems that store and collect and distribute data are secure by design. What that means is that you have to be able to not only map out where all the data is in your organization, where it's stored, but you also have to literally be able to describe and in documents to the satisfaction of the European Union, what measures that you've taken, what systems and software you have in place to ensure that data is secure and that breaches won't happen. One of the interesting things relative to breach notification in the event that there is a breach is, according to GDPR, all breaches need to be reported to the folks whose data has been compromised within 72 hours. That's apart from what has happened today. As we know, some of the breaches that I mentioned earlier in the presentation were not reported for months. And in some cases, that information was suppressed within the organizations. That will not happen under GDPR. Probably the biggest departure from some of the regulations that we've been used to in our industries for a while is that the assumption of the GDPR is that the consumer owns their data. Right? Organizations are obligated to disclose what kind of data they collect on consumers upfront and how it's going to be used. And again, I mentioned earlier, EU citizens can request that an organization forget their data, totally expunge it, everything that they have on that individual citizen. And in addition, organizations have to provide that data to consumers in a portable format so they can carry it with them. Another thing that has happened in the last month is our friends in California have actually passed, the first pass at a law that is similar, I think, in intent to GDPR. It's called the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's certainly not as sweeping as GDPR. But basically, they're going to be forcing companies that store large amounts of personal information to, again, disclose the types of data that they collect and allow consumers to opt out of having their data sold and limit selling of data for consumers under the age of 16. This will go into effect in January 2020. It remains to be seen once companies start looking into what's in this act, and what parts are going to be challenged and what parts are going to be changed. But the reality is the intent of the GDPR is going to be impacting the individual laws for the individual state jurisdictions here in the United States for sure.
Okay, Scott, let's take a look at what areas you need to look at as an organization in order to protect yourself. So we'll go through some of these areas in very high level detail, and then we're going to drill in more detailed on the data side. But from an organizational standpoint, you need to have a strong CISO in place, somebody looking after security, somebody is charged with security, and they need to publish security guidelines and make sure that all of your employees know their role in security, because it's not, you can't put it on one person. Everybody in the organization has to share in security. The physical security is really another one. You need to ensure that you have auditable physical access systems in place, card access to any facilities where someone could actually get at your computer system, which is pretty much all your offices. And The certifications, getting those third-party certifications in place, depending on what market you're in, PCI DSS, HIPAA, HITRUST, and getting those certifications in place really requires, or as a part of it, is a very, very close look at all of your security processes, all of your all the things you have in place, and that includes penetration testing, things like that are done regularly to maintain those certifications, because it's not one and done. You have to do them regularly in order to maintain the certification. You have to look at all of your processes, anything that might expose data, backups, transfers of data, FTPs, things like that. Any unsafe applications, there are testers for looking at application code and determining if there's any areas that could be unsafe in them. And of course, if you're being impacted by GDPR, if you're doing any business in the European Union or have data from people in the European Union, you're going to have to put a whole lot of new processes in place that we haven't even listed here. Everything from allowing customers to request their data, to having you delete their data from your systems, to being able to take your data or that customer's data and move it to another organization or industry, whether it's from one bank to another. Then, of course, if you're going to have to disclose a breach within 72 hours, that means you have to be ready for it. You have to expect that at some point you will be hacked. And if that happens, you need to be able to respond within 72 hours. So your people are going to have to be able to have those processes ready to go on the shelf, ready to execute if you ever do get hacked. People have to be trained on all of the things to be careful for, managing passwords safely, what to do about emails that are sent out regularly with viruses and phishing attempts and things like that. Dealing with bringing your own devices when you start connecting people's personal devices into your network. There's a lot of exposures that come about from there. Network security, of course, your IT organization really has to ensure that you've got secure firewalls, that they're doing penetration testing regularly, all the endpoint security is in place, and that might require ethical hacking. In other words, somebody going in and actually saying, hey, I'll see if I can hack into your network, and if I can, then you've got a hold fix. And if I can't, well, then you're in good shape. One that people often forget, device firmware and software. You need to make sure that you're always up to date, not just on PCs, but all the devices that are attached. So virus checkers, spyware checkers. One that a lot of hackers use are default backdoor passwords. And most every device that you connect to your network, routers, and of course, that's really close to us is printers, all have default passwords that people can access your network through those devices. And if you don't, when you set up a device, attach it to your network, if you don't go in and change those default passwords, anybody that has access to a browser can go and find out what the defaults are for that device, and then log into your system and start having their way. So you need to make sure that those are always changed to something that's secret. There was somebody recently, don't remember the exact number, but went out and found, I think it was 172,000 printers that were wide open because of those defaults not being changed. Now data. You need to ensure that the data that has any confidential information in it at all is encrypted while it's in transit and at rest as well. That any PHI and PII is redacted from data as much as possible, and that documents are signed digitally. Let's drill down a little bit more in some of those different areas to look at. System configurations, production proofing. If you're doing proofs for a customer and sending those out, you need to be very careful that you're not exposing any of that confidential information. When customers are doing ordering, you need to make sure that those processes are safe. Even when your production processes are running, you need to make sure that things are protected, that the data is encrypted. It doesn't have any opportunities for people to get at it. File transfers are a big exposure when files are being moved from one location to another over the internet. That's exposed to someone grabbing the file and being able to then look at all the information in it. And if you have hundreds of thousands of customers' information in a file and it's being transferred and someone intercepts it and grabs a copy of it, then you've got a large breach there. When you archive information, backups and archives are often an exposure for being able to let hackers at data, because while it's being archived, it's exposed, and the exposure could be very large. So if things are not encrypted and kept in a very safe environment, you can have exposures there. Print quality testing, another opportunity for things to be exposed. If the print files are sent from one location to another, say to a vendor for testing, then there's exposure there. If the final samples on paper are being sent through the mail, they're exposed, especially if there's PII in there. If you haven't redacted that information, there's a big exposure. Reprints, most organizations have reprint processes, and for either things that are damaged during printing and mailing or on request from a customer. You need to make sure those processes are secure and people don't use a reprint process to get their hands on some information by spoofing the system. And software testing, again, if you're testing with live data, that can expose a lot of confidential information. And when equipment is retired, when a device that has a hard disk in it, could be a printer, could be even a fax unit, there can be a tremendous amount of confidential information on the hard drive in that equipment. And when you retire it, you need to make sure that all that data is removed and written over with something safe so that the equipment can be retired properly without exposing anybody's information. And of course, on testing, application testing needs to be done in a safe way, not exposing production data to all of the development environments, testing environments, which usually are not as secure as a production environment. So a lot of safeguards are not necessarily in place in an application testing environment. So using redacted print files or data files is really a highly suggested, recommended approach. So in looking at general processes, some of the tips that we recommend, making sure that secure network access is in place for all of the connected devices, including DFEs on your printers, servers, operator consoles, camera systems, scanners, all of those things. Validate cloud security settings with a network security specialist to make sure you haven't left ports open or other things that might allow people to get at your network. And disable any unnecessary ports and services so you reduce the vulnerability so that things are not sitting there that are not used, that people can access your network through. Next one. Processing tips, continuing on. When you're receiving data from a customer or moving it from one organization to another where it's going through the internet, you want to make sure that the transmission is encrypted and that all incoming files are scanned for viruses, that you aren't bringing in a virus when an incoming file, be it a data file or print file or document file, making sure that those are not infected with a virus. When your data is being stored, make sure it's encrypted while it's at rest, because if somebody hacks your network, they could access that data and all of the information that's in the files. And of course, automatically deleting data at the earliest compliant date. And that's one that a lot of people fall down on. They just, something's being stored someplace and it sits there until someone says, hey, we need to get rid of this information, or is anybody still using this? Sometimes things sit for years or decades with an exposure in it when it really should have been deleted on January 1st of this year. Data transmissions, encrypted transmission, whether it's to an internal location or an external location. And people often think of that for external locations, but if something's being sent through the internet from one location internally to another location internally, it's being exposed while it's going over the internet. You want to make sure that it's encrypted. And automatically redacting or scrambling data when transmitting externally, except for, of course, your production processing where you need to have the data. Encrypting print files in motion at rest, and we'll talk about that a bit more in detail. PDF files. PDF files can be encrypted. The Acrobat and all the other PDF utilities out there provide the facility to have owner and user passwords with varying protection levels so that PDFs can be locked down as tight as you need them to be. And if you're not doing that, you're exposing stuff. Digitally signing PDFs, it's important so that recipients know that it's safe and hasn't been tampered with, especially something that's got sensitive information in it. If a normal PDF can be modified. It just amazes me how many tools there are out there to be able to edit PDFs and change the information in them. When they first came out, they were safe because nobody had tools to edit them. But now anybody can figure out how to edit a PDF. It's pretty simple. And if it's been locked down, great. That means it more than likely can't be tampered with unless somebody can hack the password for it. But if you have a digital signature inside the PDF, then when somebody opens it, they can see a green light that it's safe and has not been tampered with. Whereas if it has been tampered with, when it's got a digital signature in it, they will get a red light right away when they open it in Acrobat. It'll say, hey, this file's been tampered with, and don't trust the contents of it. And of course, redacting PII and PHI whenever data's not needed. As you know, credit card statements, for example, used to have your full account number in. Now most of them have only the last 4 digits, and also bank account statements and that sort of thing. I went through that recently trying to find the account number for my bank account, and it's no longer on the statement. You have to dig deeper to find your actual account number. You're only getting the last 4 digits. Encryption of files. There are secure algorithms, and different approaches can be done. You can encrypt an entire file at once, or you can do each page or document with a different key, or or have them encrypted independently, depending on what the use of the document or that file is going to be. For example, where do you keep the keys when you encrypt a file? Is the file encrypted every day with the same key, or do you change the key on a regular basis so that if somebody is able to figure out or find the key. Will that give them the keys to the kingdom and being able to look at all of your files. And it simply you see people whose Facebook account gets hacked and find that they use the same password for all of their different logons, and somebody can gets that password from one exposed place and then can wreak havoc, get their emails, their Facebook accounts, their Twitter account, and really wreak havoc on them. The same thing can happen with your data files if you're not making sure things are managed safely in the passwords. So we mentioned keeping files protected while in motion and at rest is important. Even in steps between between steps in workflows. And when those files are saved for reprint purposes or when they're archived, they should again always be encrypted. Always be encrypting. There you go. There's a new one. Like always be selling, always be encrypting. Use tools that decrypt in memory while processing, so remnants aren't left on disk, and that actually is a requirement of PCI DSS. And is that things are not written out to disk so that they can't be left there. That all of that information is kept in memory only when it's decrypted. And keep the files away from the files and protect them securely. So you don't keep the keys with the file or close to them, or even so that someone could get to them the same way they get to the file. Here's an example of using what a lot of people do today when they're sending their print files to someone for processing. They encrypt it with zip or some other utility like that. They get sent to wherever they're going to and get validated. Yeah, well, in order to validate them, they get unzipped. So the file gets unzipped to disk. Now it's exposed. You've got an exposure there. And a validation step is run, and it may or may not rezip the file to store it for the next process. And if it is zipped, then it's unzipped and again exposed to all sorts of internal process or people while it's being processed, doing your postal processing, any kind of the document re-engineering that might need to be done. And finally, you might zip it back up and then send it to the printing process, and then it's unzipped and printed. So you've got a lot of exposures during that processing because the whole file is being decrypted, and then a step is being run against it, and that file is on disk, and it may not be deleted for a while. One exposure is if those files get left there even till the next day's run, they're exposed through a whole 24-hour cycle. And if they do get cleaned up, then you've limited your exposure. But if they're left there for any length of time, it's even greater exposure. What we see as a much tighter approach is to use something like our Pro Lockdown product, and there's others in the market that do this. The file gets encrypted on a incremental basis. So in our case, we increment each page of a document that's in a print file gets encrypted with a secure algorithm, and then while the file's being processed through any of the validation steps, the data processing steps, postal automation, etc., it's always kept in an encrypted format when it's on disk. The decryption is done on a page-by-page basis in memory, and nothing is ever written to disk that's not encrypted. And all of the different utilities that are used in all the different processes up to the printer, the file's kept encrypted every time it's written to disk. And that way you limit that exposure. It's not there. You're not exposing anything. It's always only just encrypted in memory or decrypted in memory. So testing processes are often, for a lot of organizations, a big exposure. because test data is really difficult to generate. So a lot of developers and QA people are, I wouldn't say they're lazy, but they may not have the time to go and build their own test data files that are equivalent to production. So they use production data quite often, and that exposes a lot of confidential information, very serious exposure. You can really create a lot of problems by using test data. If you're even something simple as printing, we have a customer who I don't know if they still do, but they in order to put new printers into production, they would have to run a complete month cycle, which exposed 5 million customers' data. And what they would do at the end of that is scrap that whole month's data. So, did all of the paper get shredded before it went into the garbage? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a big exposure if it wasn't. Redaction tools can really be a big help in solving the testing process. Take your production data files and run a redaction against them to redact all of the secure information or confidential information out of those files, and then you've got a test data that you work with. Here's some examples. The original in the upper left. A simple redaction of replacing all the data with X's on the bottom left. Out in the bottom right is blanking the information out, just deleting it, which it kind of limits what both of those kind of limit what you can do in terms of testing, because you may not be able to actually determine whether your programs are working correctly, or if it's testing for print quality or in coverage, you're not getting true results. Something we came up with, we call the Crawford Tech Scramble in the upper right, takes the data and uses different characters from the font and produces something that is still the same amount of data when you're testing programs, and will give you the same kind of ink coverage when you're testing ink coverage on an inkjet press, and that's probably the best way to be able to do redaction and have something that's still valuable for testing, but protects your confidential information. So when you're doing redaction, make sure that you don't forget about the data you can't see. For example, barcodes, both machine readable and the human readable. There's quite often confidential information in those barcodes. So you want to make sure that those barcodes are redacted as well, because somebody who really knows what they're doing could really figure out and reverse engineer what's in the barcodes and get at the information there, and you have a serious breach. And you may need to keep that information for integration tests, so you need to be careful and maybe use a scramble algorithm for them as opposed to deleting it. Otherwise, the inserter tests and so on will not have something to trigger on that they would normally trigger on. So, coming back to who we are, we have enough time to be able to mention that we're a software development company that's global in our scope. We've been around for almost 23 years. The head office is in Toronto. We also have offices in New York and Fort Collins, Colorado, and London in the UK. And we really focus on solutions for the customer communications marketplace. We're at the nexus of content, data, and output management. Scott, you want to take this one?
Sure. Basically, our expertise is understanding data and documents and files and how to liberate data, really, so it can be used in various and sundry applications, and applications in some cases that weren't even a twinkle in someone's eye when the, the application was created. So we know how to take data and that's in print files and enable it to be used in e-presentment, omni-channel delivery, in accessibility frameworks, and with print services and archiving. We have a lot of know-how in this area, and as well as some very, very robust solutions that enable people to basically deliver the right messaging to the recipients of that messaging in a really timely and robust fashion. We bring a number of specific security solutions to the table to help people address, not only the problems that are inherent in doing high volume transaction printing and output, but also that help companies address some of the compliance requirements from the GDPR type of regulations and whatnot. In our transform solutions, we have the ability to encrypt output files down to the file level. Ernie talked a little about the benefits of doing that type of thing, but basically we enable you to encrypt to a level that meets PCI DSS standards. Our Pro Lockdown product, again, is specifically designed to provide levels of encryption that meet compliance with the idea of enabling secure workflow processing for output management. Redaction Express is another product that we bring to the table. Certainly, we support all the different variations of redaction, and the Crawford Scramble is a unique thing that we bring to the table with this solution, which provides a great way for people not only to protect personally identifiable information and personal healthcare information, but also provide a great means for creating test suites for those of you that are looking to add new hardware or test new substrates or things like that you can actually share with your vendors. Bernie talked earlier about the value of digitally signing PDFs. Very few solutions on the marketplace that are capable of doing this during a high volume transaction output run. So if you have 500,000 records or 5 million records that you're processing, Crawford has solutions designed specifically to address the challenges with there. And something that we know intimately ourselves is we run a service bureau in Potsdam, New York, for creating document accessibility services, the physical output formats like Braille and large print and e-text and audio. So we have large companies that are financial companies or that are healthcare companies and phone companies that are sending us data in a secure fashion to have us do the work and provide those back. We have locked our centers down. We are PCI DSS compliant, HIPAA compliant, and SOC 2 High Trust certified, so that if any of you are interested in drilling down into what that takes, what that process is, we have a lot of experience that we can share with you that's based on firsthand knowledge of what it takes to lock down a data center and what it takes to get certified. We've been pretty successful with our solutions. Certainly we pride ourselves on building software that not only is innovative, but software that works and works and works and works in some of the toughest data processing environments that exist. We also take quality and customer satisfaction very seriously. We are certified by Satmetrics to create a net promoter score, and and our current Net Promoter Score is plus 68. We're really proud of that because that puts us in the same atmosphere as USAA and Apple. Clearly, they have a slightly larger sample size than we do in terms of respondents to the surveys, but again, we're very, very, very happy and proud of the fact that our customers not only appreciate the solutions we bring to the table, but they appreciate how we support them after the fact. And with that, I think we should open it up, Katrina, for questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Scott and Ernie, for that great presentation. As Scott said, we will take your questions now, and we did have a few come in during the presentation. So let's get to this. So e-delivery, can we email campaign CDN data, so name and email, once we have confirmed consent? The data resides in Canada. We would provide a Pearl link for customers to access their fund holdings in a PDF format from our US server. And then they added, of course, the email address data would be transferred through a SFTP from server to server.
That's a good question as to there's a lot of ifs and that in there. In that are the from the email, does the person need to have a confidential user ID and password to sign in to be able to view the PDF, either through some kind of a portal in front of the PDF or an encrypted PDF, but there needs to be a way somebody can't just go from an email, because if the email is intercepted, that if they can go directly to the PDF and see it, that's a big exposure. So in terms of cross-border, that will kind of depend on the market segment as to whether the information can be transmitted across border. I know with a lot of our customers in a lot of the areas that we work in financial and healthcare, the information can't be transmitted across border, which is why we have processing centers in Canada and the United States, so that we can do work for Canadian companies in Canada and U.S. companies in the United States without having any transborder shipment of data.
Okay, great. And I think you kind of just answered this question with that last sentence that you just had, but maybe you want to go beyond. But are there any Canadian laws preventing the storage of Canadian data, customer data, on a U.S. server?
That's a good question. There's PIPEDA. I haven't looked at PIPEDA to see if it requires the data to be resident in Canada. So I really don't have an answer. That's something that's an interesting question, though, as to whether regulations or whether they are policies. A lot of organizations have policies. And then within industries, in the financial industry, it's just not done. And I don't know whether that's policies or where the laws are. Healthcare, again, would be things like PIPEDA and HIPAA have regulations against offshore shipment of data, and Canada is considered offshore to the United States. So need to look at the actual industry that you're in and which laws might apply to that industry.
Okay, thanks. Redaction Express, is it capable for different languages, accents, French?
Yes, it is. It supports any language.
Okay. And then Pro Lockdown, is this a Pro Workflow connector with an encryption process added?
No, it's completely different than Pro Connector. It involves a encrypted file format that we've been using for years, and there are thousands of organizations that are using it. A lot of them unknown because there are service bureaus that are using it, and it's used in production processes all over the place. And that encrypted format is, at the file level as opposed to the transmission level, where ProConnector works at the transmission level.
Okay.
Not only is
auditing.
it, but
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, I wanted to say that Pro Lockdown has the ability to lock down to the individual page level as well, which is provides an extra layer. You can actually have a separate key for each page.
Okay.
Yeah, it allows you to lock it as tight as you need to.
Great. What about auditing? Can your solutions help if we are audited?
Yes, having tools in place that show the redaction or encryption or whatever it is that you're doing, and having logs that are produced and stored to show that you're using those tools and that they're being operated on your files can definitely help in an audit.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like that's all of the questions that we have from the audience today. Thank you again for everybody for attending this webinar. As we said at the beginning of the webinar, we have been recording, so we will get out that recording to everyone who registered. And thank you everybody for attending today's webinar, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day. We will now conclude the webinar.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.